He asked me, I didn't realize how difficult it would be to move to a completely different country. Matches. My family moved to the United States in the 90s. I was 10 years old and barely spoke English. My parents made me believe there would be many other Latin American children in Florida. But we ended up in an area with a majority of white people. Just simple things like, my name is, or I am 10 years old, and I come from this country. I knew I could learn quickly because I had always been a good student in my country. At my age, it was very likely that I would always have an accent. Furthermore, I was darker than my classmates and received strange looks. Despite what you see in many movies, Latin American countries are quite diverse. We have everything from blonde hair and blue eyes to the darkest skin tones, and some places have distinct or more diverse ethnic groups. But the point is that I had already met different kinds of people. I had never thought about these differences. The American experience my new classmates had, obviously, without any exposure to other people or foreign cultures. And gradually I had to learn the rules of this country regarding race and other topics, and that was a huge culture shock. In the first few days, I only received strange looks and some friendly and curious looks. Matches. Most teachers were friendly and tried to help me, even though I barely understood them at first. Some girls tried to talk to me, and we laughed while making gestures. They taught me a lot, and these girls became my best friends for the rest of my school days. But as I spoke more English with my accent, I noticed that not everyone wanted to be my friend. As I got older and my knowledge of the world grew, I theorized that these children were likely influenced by their parents at home. Today I know I was completely right. In the beginning, everyone seemed just curious, but looking back at how that curiosity turned into hate, it is quite hard. Children are not born with prejudices. They are dragged into them, but deeper touches. And some adults have no idea how damagingly they influence their children's thoughts. As I became more confident with my language skills, I spoke more in class, but one day I heard teasing for the first time. Matches. Someone repeated exactly what I had said to the teacher, but in a ridiculous tone and with a fake accent, and the others laughed. The teacher scolded them, but they did it sporadically, and I heard it on the playground too. My mother told me not to listen to them, that they were simply jealous because I already spoke 2 languages while they only mastered 1, and her words calmed me a little. The next time, I used this logic as a kind of answer. I told the girl that it made her jealous, but she also had something to say. Who wants to speak Spanish? Oh, that's for poor people. And her friends laughed. I started to cry. The teacher sent them to the principal's office, but that didn't stop them. She continued, whenever she could, and kept getting into trouble. One day her mother came to school. He asked me, and I was told that she had complained about the foreign student who was getting her daughter into trouble. She was moved to another class to be as far away from me as possible before he asked me for matches, and her friends continued trying to make fun of me whenever they could, but they couldn't do it in the classroom anymore. After a while, the other classmates got bored. You can't make the same teasing joke many times before people just stop finding it funny. He asked me for matches. The girls didn't like that I was making more friends, and even the boys started talking to me and asking questions. I will call my main tormentor Sarah and her friends. Don't really deserve names. They were just her followers. The worst of Sarah's bullying began during a break. I was playing on the schoolyard with my other friends, and there was a tunnel. It wasn't a slide tunnel as it was straight, but I loved it. Hiaches, I went through it following my friend Anna, who was just coming out. I was almost out when Sarah blocked the entrance. She asked where I was going and used a word I hadn't heard before. And later I learned it was actually a racial slur. Although I didn't know the word, I knew it wasn't well intentioned. I went back and saw her followers at the other end, and suddenly they started throwing stones into the tunnel. I covered myself as best as I could and called for help while hearing, "Go back to your country," over and over. It felt like I was being hated for hours, but it was less than a minute before several teachers pulled them away and got me out of the tunnel. I had some scratches. Mainly I was emotionally shocked. My mother was called, who couldn't do much with her limited English, but she made a lot of noise. Sarah's mother came and played along again, but the teachers scolded her. And Anna and some others told everyone what Sarah and her followers had said about me. No one was happy. It was a big scandal. It may seem trivial, but this event, together with all the previous teasing, shook me to the core. I was old enough to know that it wasn't like this in other places. That night I cried to my mother and said I wanted to return home. I had good friends, but I was honestly afraid to have to live like this. We couldn't go back. Parents had sacrificed so much to move here and give us a better life. My mother explained this to me when I stopped crying, and I understood. I decided to be stronger, although part of my shine had already extinguished by that time. I went to school and tried to stay as far away from Sarah and her friends as possible. I never used that tunnel again. I practiced a lot to completely lose my accent. You can still tell that English isn't my native language. It's not as obvious anymore. Once I didn't stand out as much as before. Sarah largely left me alone. She grew into one of the most terrible people you could really know. In middle school, there were more diverse students, and she hated everyone. She despised anyone who was a little different, not just in terms of race, but in other aspects, and used some really bad terms to describe them. She continued to hate me, but that was because I was conventionally pretty, attractive, quite popular with both boys and girls, as well as the teachers. I had a great group of good friends and a solid base. I thought I had left that tunnel behind in middle school, matches. But later I realized that she had done something to me that really stayed with me for a long time. For many years, I alienated myself from my culture. I only ate what other kids ate and tried not to speak Spanish outside of my family. Matches. I told new people I met that I was born here, and I did a lot to hide who I really was. I believe that was Sarah's work. She led me to hate and made me afraid of my origin, my identity, and my connection to my family. But when I realized what she had done, I changed. As soon as I had saved enough money, I got my parents to visit our home country, met other relatives, and experienced what I had lost about myself. I brought clothes, souvenirs, photos, and more back home, and I celebrate who I am just as I celebrate the fact of being a U.S. citizen. No one like Sarah or similar people will ever take that away from me again. Next horror story. When I was a little boy, I had a best friend, and his name was Paul. For a while, he was incredible. I didn't spend much time at home because my parents were very strict. I understand they were trying to raise me right, but my father's military career made it hard for me to be who I really was. My mother did the same, and so I often felt alone in the world until I met Paul. Since my father was in the military, we moved often, and I didn't have the opportunity to make many friends. Paul was my neighbor. It was as if he had taken me under his wing, and we became best friends almost immediately. I also found him quite cool. He had much more freedom at home. His parents let him go out wherever he wanted, and whenever he wanted. Even when we were 14 and in freshman year, he introduced me to many things I probably shouldn't have seen, but I was growing up and was interested. My parents would have killed me if they had found out, but I felt freer through him, which is why for a while I didn't realize that things with Paul weren't so normal. In school, matches, we always sat in the same spot and had the same group of friends. Paul's friends followed him in a way because he was like a leader to them. Matches. The first time I noticed something strange was the day after a small project in class, where I met a cool guy from the chess club who had a taste in music, movies, and books that I didn't even know about. Since I am a very curious kid, I continued talking to him. Went to the cafeteria together during our free period and talked about his music taste, among other things. I was quite fascinated. Paul must have gone into the cafeteria without me noticing, and suddenly I felt a pull on my shirt. And so I turned around and saw his very angry face. He asked me what the hell I was doing with this loser. I didn't know what to say. My new friend was surprised and a bit scared, and I didn't know what to do. He asked me for matches, so I let Paul drag me back to our regular table, and nothing more was mentioned during the entire free period. But I'm not an idiot. When we were alone at school, I asked him why he had done that, and Paul managed to convince me that I had to be careful with whom I spent my time. I wasn't allowed to be seen with any losers from the chess club. Paul told me that he didn't want to be my friend anymore if I wanted to be a loser too. That was very scary at that age. I couldn't imagine not having Paul and his friends as friends after years of having no one to confide in. So I agreed and stopped talking to the boy. The next incident occurred a few weeks later, when he invited me over to watch TV and play games, and two girls were there. You asked me for matches, but it was the first time I was with girls in such a private setting. I asked what we were watching, and Paul forced us to watch something for adults on his TV. I don't know if the girls liked it, but they didn't say a word. At some point, Paul called me into the kitchen and said that he was going to his room to make out with one of the girls. I told him I was fine, but that I was tired and wanted to leave. Looked at me angrily and told me not to leave, but to stay and make out with the other girl. I told him I didn't want to do that. Matches. Yes, I was a teenager with raging hormones, but I didn't want to make out with just any girl that night. Paul said I had to kiss her right there, and in his presence, otherwise I could go home and never talk to him again. It all seemed so unfair to me, but that threat was enough to move me. The girl seemed interested. Maybe she just wanted to fit in, just like me. We kissed, and it was my first kiss, but not how I had imagined or wished it to be. I definitely wouldn't have wanted Paul to be. They're directing the whole thing. Matches. I continued kissing her until Paul went into the other room with the other girl. Man. And then I pulled away and told the girl that I was leaving, and she said she wanted to leave too. She and I never spoke again, but Paul told all the guys in our friend group about it, and made me look like a hero because I had kissed the girl, and I didn't like that. But at least he was happy, and I guess we were still friends. Small things like this continued to happen, but eventually Paul stopped threatening me with his friendship and started hitting me instead. At first, it was small, like a shove in the shoulder. That was a bit too painful to be comfortable. It wasn't very friendly. He would smack me on the back of the head if I wasn't fast enough for him, and my shins took a few kicks too. And the things he demanded of me, like stealing a bottle of vodka from a store, got worse. I don't want to paint my teenage self as the most innocent person in the world. I knew I was doing something wrong. I did it. It is hard to remember what it was like or why. I felt obliged to do what he wanted. Yes, he hit me, but it was like a trance I couldn't get out of. Once, I pulled an apron off a girl on the schoolyard because Paul demanded it. I actually did it expecting to get in trouble, for the school to call my parents. If my father had found out, he would have forbidden me from going out or leaving the house until I was 18. I wanted to get in trouble. Matches. I didn't think there was another way to get away from Paul. But actually, I didn't get in trouble. No teacher had seen it. And when I asked about it, Paul said he had talked to the girl. You know you can count on me, right? As long as you and I are a team, nothing will stop us. I smiled. I really wasn't happy. Paul's demands and requests became more frequent, and I swear I tried to refuse, but he would get completely furious and hit me repeatedly. Those were the moments when no one was around. One night, Paul said we were going to steal a car to go for a joyride. I told him firmly no. We were 15 years old, and I knew he wanted me to drive, and if we got caught, I would take the blame. I had enough of his authoritarian way. Paul started hitting me as usual, laughing at me, hurting my shins, and yet I didn't give in. He got angrier and angrier until all that rage exploded and I got a serious beating. At that point, I tried to protect myself from the blows, but it wasn't easy. Something was unleashed, and it only ended when a couple of guys in a nearby van yelled for him to stop, and he ran away. I was okay, just a little bruised and beaten, but I made it home and to school the next day, without my parents noticing. However, the teachers and others saw the bruises on my face. The staff thought I was being abused at home, and the teacher called the principal. I just kept walking, because I didn't want to see Paul. I only saw him out of the corner of my eye with his arms crossed as he stepped into the principal's office. But I kept walking. The school called my parents, and I still smile when I think of how the principal, Mr. Perez, before he and the counselor confronted my intimidating father for matches. They said they would call child services and the police to arrest him. My mother started crying, and right at that moment, I told them the truth. I broke down and told them how I felt with Paul and endured his bullying. The meeting ended, and I was sent home that day. I expected a lecture from my father, but it was different seeing him affected while watching me cry. He spoke to me in private without his usual posture, and I had never felt a real connection to him until that moment. He comforted me in his cold way and told me I wouldn't have to worry about Paul anymore. We moved, and I swear I never felt so good about news like that. I didn't say goodbye to anyone at school. I think I will do that here now, even if it's been years. Goodbye, Paul. I hope to never see you again. Next horror story. This happened when I was 15 years old, in my sophomore year of high school. Unfortunately, lunch breaks were assigned randomly, so that year I only had Liam and Mike with me during that hour. A new boy joined our first period astronomy class one day. Our teacher, who was a joker, introduced himself in front of the class. His name was Craig. He made a short joke with Craig and then asked him to sit down. I was sitting in the back in the last row. Empty seat was next to me in the back corner. Craig came and sat next to me. The class hadn't officially started yet, so everyone was talking. As Craig sat down, he looked around the room, and then I felt his gaze wander to me. I turned my head, and we looked at each other. "What's up?" I replied. "Hey man, what's up?" He introduced himself, so I gave him my name too. Craig was a white boy with patchy, somewhat unkempt facial hair. He wasn't particularly attractive, but not extremely ugly either. He just looked like an average guy. We chatted in small groups, and I was friendly because I could imagine how hard the first day at a new school would be. I was probably the first person he had officially spoken to at the school. During this phase, we had to form groups for a project, so Craig naturally asked me if we could work together. Why not? I didn't have any close friends in that class anyway. A notebook for the project, so everyone had a laptop. I quickly realized that I didn't like Craig's humor. He made too many jokes and acted like we were good friends. But his jokes were weird, always followed by that awkward laugh after every remark, and constantly these vulgar and dirty jokes. I'm not a particularly sensitive person about such things, but with him, it was too much. At the end of class, we had to exchange numbers for the project, and then it was time for the next course. Finally, the lunch break came. Mike wasn't at school that day, so Liam and I were alone at our small round table. Suddenly, I saw Liam's eyes look up at someone behind me. Then, someone came over and pulled another chair next to me. I looked and recognized Craig on the shoulder and said, "What's up, friend?" Inside, I died a little. That meant he would sit here every day now. I tried to stay positive and give him a chance. Maybe he wasn't that bad. In the beginning, Liam tried to be nice, but eventually, Craig acted weird again. He asked me for matches. Liam started to notice that something was wrong, and every time Craig wasn't looking, he threw me understanding glances. Prefers me for matches. That lunch made the certainty grow in me that something was not right with Craig. For matches, I don't like to judge anyone by their social skills, but something about him felt dark. He asked me for matches. He said went far beyond a simple antisocial personality. After school that day, since it was Friday, I went home and started typing in my group chat about what we would do later. Walk home. I received a message from an unknown number. Upon opening it, I noticed it was Craig. He wrote, "I did and saw Craig walking towards me on the sidewalk, waving. Oh God?" I whispered internally. I waited until he got closer, and he asked me how far I lived from the school. I replied that it was about a 10-minute walk. He said he lived nearby too. Then he offered to walk with me. After that, he asked if we could quickly work on the project and drink a few beers. While doing so, I replied that I was actually busy with my friends. He tried to invite himself and asked what exactly we were doing. I said that we were just hanging out at Liam's house, and he asked if it was okay if he came. I didn't even know what to say. Liam's mom doesn't let strangers in. It seemed to work. Craig stayed with me, and I started wondering if he would really follow me all the way to my home. He did. I got home and said, "Okay, man, see you later," and gave him a little fist bump. He said, "See you later," and kept walking down the street. I saw him look back, so I turned my gaze away. I wrote in my chat group about how weird that was, and Liam supported what I said. We planned to really meet at Liam's house. 9 p.m. An hour or two later, I got a disturbing message from Craig. He wrote, "Hey, what's happening in front of your house?" I replied, "What do you mean?" I ran out onto the porch. There were no police cars, only Craig standing on our path. He was laughing like a complete lunatic. Then he added, "I thought you were going to your friend Liam's." I said, "Yes." Then I asked, "Why are you so weird?" He didn't laugh. I saw how he felt visibly offended. So I went in and locked the door. He sent me an offended message. "Bro, a TF." I was shocked. Met this guy today. We had spent 40 minutes together. Why was he stalking me, following me, and harassing me now? He had actually tricked me into coming out just to see if I was home. I replied, "You're scaring me, bro." This was probably a mistake. He sent me a long message about how he thought I was chill and different from the others, but that I was just like everyone else anyway. Matches. I sent a screenshot to my group of friends, and everyone laughed in surprise simultaneously. I wrote an email to my teacher and asked to do the work alone, explaining the situation. After that, I went to Liam's house alone, just to get out for a bit. While I was at Liam's house, Craig tried to call me. I let it ring and ignored the call. On Monday morning, the day at school was going to be uncomfortable. To make a long story short, when I came home around 11 or 12, my parents and my sister weren't there. My parents were probably out with friends, and my sister probably with her boyfriend. Nothing unusual. I locked the door behind me and went upstairs to my room. I started watching YouTube videos. Suddenly, I heard the doorbell of the back door. Yes, our house has a back door with its own doorbell sound. Sounded different from the front door. I got up and went down the stairs, hoping that my sister was at the back door. But the lights in the backyard were off, and no one was on the other side of the door. I could see through the glass. I opened the front door, but left the security screen door closed. I said, "Hello," and clearly heard the sound of a footstep on the concrete in the garden directly to the left of the door. I closed the door again and locked it. I called my dad, but he didn't answer. At that point, my phone started ringing again. I didn't answer the call. "Come out," I replied. "I'm calling the police." And to my surprise, he replied, "Okay, okay." It was him. He was hiding in the garden, waiting for me to go out. I sent the screenshot to my family and friends, and then to the school, who would contact his parents. Apparently, that was exactly why his family had to keep moving, because he caused trouble in every school he attended. I can only imagine what terrible things he did to others who didn't want to be his friends. He didn't show up to a single class on Monday, and never again. If I had to guess, I would say he changed schools once more. Next horror story. I can't remember a moment in my school years when I wasn't bullied by someone. This phase ended at university, but by that time everything was already broken. Was I stronger? Maybe. But I would trade all my strength for the opportunity to have a normal school experience. I lived in a dormitory with enough people so that not everyone knew each other. But I was unlucky because my main bullies were 3 of the meanest girls in the world. They followed me throughout my entire formative years. They officially started bullying me only in the 3rd grade. I already knew what it was like to be mocked, mostly by children who were just afraid of cooties from girls and things like that. But in the 3rd grade began these 3 girls, whom I will call Janice, Emma, and Gaia, before he asked me for matches. Notice that during breaks I preferred to draw instead of talking to others or running around the schoolyard. On that first day, they took one of my drawings, threw it in the trash, and then poured juice over it. I don't remember it exactly, but I remember crying like a baby. It wasn't hard to make me cry back then. That was the key to this. The more you reacted, the more they pushed you. They were reprimanded that day and separated from me, but mean girls are hard to deter. Over the years, I wished in those moments to be a boy, because I saw how boys bullied each other, and by and large, it was mostly something physical. I wished I could have confronted them physically. Bullying among girls is much more subtle and terrible than that. This might sound a bit simplistic to people who have experienced physical bullying, but that's how I felt, as if boys settled things quickly, while I had to play a political game against 9-year-old girls. Later would I learn that physical bullying is not better or easier to endure either. When they realized they could make me cry at almost every opportunity, I became their easiest target. Everything they did to me, for matches, from taunts in class with every sharp object they found to notes with terrible insults that hit my childlike self-esteem. You are 9 years old and read that you are so ugly that all boys will hate you forever. It really hits deep. I broke down again and again, and I couldn't control it no matter how hard I tried. As soon as I started to cry, and only made it worse. Even my teachers got annoyed over time. In the beginning, they held them back, but eventually, they just rolled their eyes and continued with the lesson, ignoring me. It was probably easier than constantly sending girls, to the administration and interrupting the lesson every day. It took about 2 years until I had accumulated enough psychological pain and tolerance to stop crying like a baby every time they did something. I still got teary, eyed again and again, and that only motivated them more. I still don't know why. It gave them so much fun, but it didn't matter because my tolerance didn't change anything about it. Grew, and things only got worse. Everything that could go wrong in puberty happened to me. Braces, bad posture, acne, God, even a little mustache. And pressed me for matches. Although my parents cared enough to get me braces, they didn't think something like removing my mustache was necessary. Acne and body hair are part of puberty, my mother said, before he asked me for matches. Please don't believe that when your children tell you they want to remove their mustache or leg hair, let them do it. Maybe my life could have been better if my mother had listened to me and allowed it. I might have felt better. So I had to get used to the ridicule from Janice, Emma, and Gaia in my most vulnerable moments. It may sound silly, but once someone gave me chocolate and I ate it during the break, gotten used to the braces and thought I had cleaned everything without anything getting stuck. Cotches, but chocolate got stuck between my teeth, and I quickly realized that this had been the plan from the beginning. I went back to class, and somehow the girls had convinced a boy named Julian to ask me if I liked the chocolate. I remember he was quite popular, so I smiled immediately with my chocolate and braces smile. Everyone started laughing, including him. This happened at a time when phones got cameras, and I remember they took photos. I felt deeply ashamed. I can hardly imagine how I would have felt if these photos had appeared on the internet. But luckily they only circulated within our classmates and had a low resolution. I cried silently, as I had learned. My face after that class ended. Such things happened often over the years. Only in high school did their behavior change a little. I had learned not to cry at all anymore. Admit, although the teasing was still terrible, and the total ignorance or disinterest of the teachers tore me apart, I had finally learned to control my tears. I also understood that bullying victims radiate fear, pain, and low self-esteem. Knew that. Matches. They had bullied me for so many years that I believed they just did it out of habit. But when I stopped crying, finally, days passed when no one, even them, bothered me. The matches, I had the reputation of being the weird girl, the loner who was always drawing, but at least they left me alone. High school also brought new things for everyone else, and Gaia developed their own interests. Cheerleading, student council, model United Nations. And yes, although it sounds terrible, the truth is that not all bullies are total idiots. I had the art club. Many were introverted. I can't say I made many friends, but I fit in somehow, and that gave me more self-confidence. If I met them in the hallways or in class, I simply ignored them. It sounds silly and simple, because that is what adults tell you to do with bullies, but ignoring them was not easy. I was proud of having managed it, at least until I was assigned to a boy who was interested in Gaia. I hadn't chosen him. I didn't even like him particularly. I remember his name was Tony. The teacher put us together, and we worked in the library at the computers after school. That's how Gaia saw us. The next day, teased me for matches. Started bullying me again, as if they hadn't done it for years. They went into the bathroom behind me, although I only noticed them when it was too late. They locked the door and threw me into a stall. I had learned to ignore them in the past, but with this level of aggression, I couldn't. I fell against the toilet and hit my back on a water pipe. While I was trying to overcome the pain, Gaia hit me on the nose with a book. I screamed while trying to figure out if I still had my nose. Gaia approached and pulled my hair, asking me what I was doing with Tony. I replied under suppressed breath that it was just an assigned project. When she heard that, she finally let me go. And just at that moment, the most terrible sound in the world rang out her laughter. I hadn't heard this laughter for years. Almost mechanically, I started to cry, not just because of the physical pain, but because it happened automatically. All of a sudden, I was a little girl again, and they continued laughing and saying things like, "Of course, Tony would never feel anything for someone like you. Gaia, you knew it was just a school thing." I remember Gaia's mocking smile as she said, "It wasn't important, because I had to learn a lesson, and that it was amusing to see me cry again." Janice came very close to me and added, "Did you think we had forgotten you? No, we just have better things to do. The next time you get close to one of our boys, it will be much worse." I remember those words, our boys. I didn't even know Gaia had an interest in Tony. I continued crying until finally someone opened the door. It was a teacher I didn't know. She asked what had happened. And Emma said they didn't know. They had found me crying in the bathroom and just wanted to help, but I didn't want to tell them what was going on. The girls left, and the teacher tried to ask me what was wrong. I kept crying and crying. My mother came to pick me up and gave me a lecture because she had received a call from the school. Between my sobs, I told her that people were bullying me and that no one was doing anything or believing me. She still punished me for acting like that. My mother wasn't cruel or anything, but she just didn't understand. According to her stories, she was popular in school. The next day, I came to school with visible bruises. Very nice, right? I asked the teacher to allow me to do the project alone and almost begged. Tony could easily be assigned to another group. In the end, she agreed. Since then, I tried to avoid all boys and insisted on working alone or at best with girls. The teacher thought I was afraid of boys, but she didn't ask why. That led to a rumor that I was a lesbian, and you can probably imagine how that became another reason for bullying. Ignoring became my way of dealing with it. Even towards those who wanted to be friendly to me, I remained silent. Matches. They had completely destroyed me after all these years, and that bathroom incident. Maybe it wasn't just their fault, but also that of the others who were never worried about me, or maybe my mother. Anyway, maybe you expect a story about revenge, but there is none. However, there is a positive aspect. At 18, and went to university. I made friends, remained somewhat introverted, but finally, I shaved where I wanted to. I would say that I found myself beautiful, which was a huge success considering how I had felt before. As for Janice, Gaia, I think they are leading pretty good lives as far as I know. And yes, I know that's not what most people want to hear, but that's life. Maybe karma will catch up with them one day, or maybe not. Next horror story. It was the last year when this happened, and everyone was talking about the football season at our high school all the time. Always big on football because our team was really good, and in our boring rural town, there wasn't much else to do. On a school day, we had a pretty absurd elective course. My friend JJ was in this class with me, so we kept getting into trouble. It was a Friday, and there was a football game that evening, so we planned to go. JJ, who was always the charming talker, turned his chair to these girls, Kayla and Ashley, and asked them if they wanted to come to the football game with us. We already knew them well, so it wasn't unusual for him to invite them. They seemed willing to meet later. Took me home after school. 4 hours later, he picked me up, and then we drove to pick up Kayla and Ashley. After that, we drove to the back parking lot of the school next to the woods. We had some Four Locos in the car so no one would pass by. Subsequently, we poured more of it into water bottles, which we took onto the bleachers. We went to secure good seats at the very top of the bleachers. Since the game started late, it got darker and darker during the third quarter, and by the fourth quarter, it was completely dark. Our team was quite far behind, which rarely happened in this game. So many kids left the bleachers early. We stayed to chill near the field anyway. When the game ended, team lost really badly, and the field and the bleachers were silent. Ran quickly from the bleachers. The home team rushed back to the locker rooms in shame, and the opposing team walked slowly to the buses. Within less than 10 minutes, Festaya knows me. We're almost the only ones still sitting on the bleachers, except for a few others and maybe a few people on the field, quite drunk at that point, and the team's loss didn't really ruin our mood. When the field lights went out, it was practically pitch black, except for the pale light of the moon shimmering between the trees. Everyone had left to lie down on the field. JJ ran to his car to get more alcohol. It was probably around 10 p.m. JJ suggested going into the woods next to the football field. The girls were naturally scared, so the idea seemed amusing. When they didn't want to come, we got up and ran into the woods, leaving them alone in the darkness, expecting them to get scared and follow us, which they did. Me asked me for matches. We crawled through a small piece of damaged fencing that kids often use to get into the woods and started running down the slope. The girls were very hesitant to follow us, but eventually they did. We had lost sight of them briefly and hid behind a few trees to scare them. When they heard our footsteps, they couldn't stand still. They tried to reach us but lost sight of us and hid behind a tree. We laughed for a few seconds until JJ touched me and showed me to look in a direction. Before it was dark, we could see a black figure through the faint moonlight shimmering between the trees, maybe 15 feet away from us, right between two trees. It was a terrifying apparition. Then this figure spoke. It was a woman's voice that said, "You boys shouldn't be here." We stood still and looked at the apparent figure of the woman. But soon we noticed that she was approaching quickly, no legs moving, or what we thought were legs. We heard no footsteps. JJ and I turned around and ran, calling the girls' names until we found them, and they followed us out of the woods. We just asked them to follow us to the car and reach it. Finally, we told them that a woman at least 7 feet tall was in the woods. If I hadn't seen that too, I would think I had seen a ghost. The girls were scared and asked us to tell them we were joking. We weren't. From the car, we watched if anyone came out of the woods, but no one ever did. The big question is, Mumale, why would an elderly woman be alone in a fenced forest area in the middle of the night? It was a natural hiking trail. It was a wooded area. Furthermore, our school had no security at that time, so it wasn't a problematic area. The 4 of us went to JJ's house afterward, me for matches. And I'll leave the rest of that night to your imagination. But now let's really jump to that summer when I worked at the school for the last time, specifically as a summer janitor, because I got a small bonus every year. There were only 4 people in the building, and another 18th year old. We had a very short schoolyard mowing the lawn. When I saw someone in an upstairs window, it was an elderly woman, maybe 65 years old, or so it seemed to me from the distance, with short curly hair. Her face was somewhat blurry behind the light of the window pane. I paused, looked at her, and made a hand gesture. She didn't react, didn't even move. Matches. I basically ran into the building where my boss was and told him about the woman in the upstairs window, who told me that. And I led him there. We were in the upper hallway of the math section, but to my amazement, matches, all classroom doors were closed, and the lights off. The room where I thought she was completely empty. My boss told me that no one else was in the building, and that I urgently needed to drink a coffee, so I went back down. I was really scared. After I had mowed the lawn, I started mopping the hallways on the upper floor. Finally, for matches, I was in the math hallway and intended to mop all classrooms up to the last room. I opened all doors and turned on the lights. My radio was on the floor playing music as always, but while the music was playing, I heard a clearly female voice. She said, "Boy." The voice came from one of the rooms, but I couldn't tell from which one. Matches. I turned off the music and desperately started searching every nearby classroom, hoping to find someone. Every classroom was empty. I even checked behind the desks. The hair on my arms stood up. I felt the flight or fight response activating. I retreated to the lower floor and told my boss again that someone was upstairs, and I had even heard a female voice now. He went up with me again, and I explained to him that I hadn't found anyone, but that I had seen and heard a woman upstairs. When we didn't find anyone this time either, he told me to go home, take the day off, and rest because he thought I was crazy. Since then, I have connected both incidents. What if they are connected? What if what JJ and I saw in the woods and what I saw and heard in that classroom are somehow related? When I went back to work the next day, I told my boss that I simply didn't want to work in the math hallway anymore because I was completely scared. Since then, I have never gone into that hallway again. For matches, since then, I firmly believe that my old high school is haunted by the ghost of an elderly woman. I have no other explanation. Next horror story. Doing nothing against bullying is almost worse than the act itself. I thought I hadn't done anything to this boy and even forgot him for years. I rationalized, sure, but it ate me up inside. And I want to know how much I should hold myself responsible now. Bullying is normalized in our society, and when victims react to it, it is often them who get into trouble. But Andy didn't react at all. Typical movie scenario: a thin boy, a freshman, is bullied by the older jocks. I was a senior back then. He asked me for matches. It is a cliché for a reason, because it has happened often and will continue to happen regardless of how many generations pass. In the locker rooms, the hallways, and in class, Andy was exposed to constant mockery. They hit him every time if he couldn't get out of school fast enough, and no one did anything. Even when he came to school the next day with bruises and swollen eyes. We laughed about it. I think only one teacher tried to do something, but I'm not sure. I think I saw her one day being reprimanded by one of the coaches, but maybe they were talking about something else. The fact is that nothing was ever done, and everyone continued to look away. Matches. I think even Andy's parents didn't really care, because if the same thing had happened to me, my mother would have gone crazy. Looking back, I wouldn't even have blamed her. If she had actually unleashed herself and done something bad to everyone, she didn't. Matches. And the worst bullying event happened after the last cheerleading rally of the football team in our senior year. I don't know why Andy went to this rally. I mean, it was an event to celebrate his biggest tormentors, for which I am ashamed to have considered them my friends. This is another indication that Andy's home life wasn't exactly good. Maybe he just had nothing else to do, so he stayed as long as possible that day. But he shouldn't have. The rally was over. Everyone left. Most seniors returned to school to celebrate this big party. We weren't exactly a small town, but parties in other places with alcohol and other substances wouldn't have been easy. The school was our only option at that moment. We drank too much, but I stopped before I got too drunk. I was also more occupied with a girl, Matches, but during a break in our making out and touching actions, one of the guys, Carlson, pulled me to the others from the team, and we started talking about the senior prank. It had to be epic. Matches, the seniors at our school, were famous for their funny and thoughtful pranks, but ones that didn't get us into trouble. Matches. They suggested things that could get us into jail, and I told them not to be idiots. We couldn't risk the last season game and our graduation, so stealing the final exam of the entire school was not an option. Matches. Nor was destroying the principal's car or pushing it into a body of water. I had to remind them multiple times that the idea was to do something entertaining and clever, but without getting us expelled. They laughed but understood the wisdom of my words. Then I suggested other ideas, but we didn't plan anything serious. Then our friend Walter came to us, just as we were talking about running naked through the school parking lot on a random Monday. I would say he was the biggest bully of the team and the entire senior class. He was huge, had wealthy parents and influence, so in my perception, he was practically untouchable. We all assumed Walter had left with a girl, but he came back dragging Andy behind him. He started saying things like, "Look who I found," and everyone started making fun of him, even me. I knew something bad would happen. I laughed like a hyena anyway. When I saw the little kid, Walter said that he had an idea for the senior prank and that it targeted Andy entirely. Somehow I stopped laughing. Me for matches. I tried to tell them that it really couldn't be that kind of prank. But with Walter there, everyone stopped listening to me. Richie was the mascot of our team, and a pretty athletic guy. He had fetched a lion costume from some storage and said, "Let's put this on." Walter loved this idea. Everyone started cheering again, and while we forced the little kid into a big lion suit, Walter made him get on all fours and roar. For a while, while we just watched. Then we started throwing beer at the kid. Well, but it was still quite humiliating. Walter kept screaming that he should roar, and we screamed too. After a while, I noticed that the girls got bored and most left without us. It was because we weren't paying attention to them anymore. In my imagination, parties without girls really make no sense, so I told the guys that it was probably time to go too. Only then did they notice the absence of the girls. Carlson told Walter that everyone was leaving, but Walter stopped us and said something like, "No," to finish our last prank. I asked him what else he wanted. We had tormented the little kid all year and practically all night. Finally, he told us to follow him and drag Andy, still in that lion suit, into the locker room to the showers with Carlson, Richie, and 2 other guys. So it wasn't everyone who saw what happened. Walter got a rope from somewhere and tied Andy to one of the showers. We had a system where the pipes were in the middle of the shower area like columns, so it was easy to fix them. Then Walter turned the water on, and Richie complained because he was the one who would take the blame if the suit was completely ruined. I felt quite uncomfortable too at that point, but Walter paid attention to neither Richie nor me. He sprayed the boy, stood motionless in his place. Matches. And I still shiver now, because I had the feeling that he was more than just tied to the shower, defeated or had surrendered to the humiliation by Walter. This kid was completely absent. That Richie finally said something like, "That's enough. I give up. If anyone asks, I'll blame you." Walter yelled at him and continued. Carlson was also worried and asked him to stop and just untie Andy. Walter was in some kind of frenzy, and honestly, I don't think there would have been a way to stop him. Walter turned the water off, and I thought it was finally over. But then he pulled his pants down, and that was enough for me. I asked him what the hell he was doing, but it was too late. He started urinating on the kid and laughed, urging us to join him. I looked at Carlson and just shook my head at how sick everything was. After that, I left without worrying about the consequences. All I thought about was that I didn't want to see him anymore. I came home that evening quite exhausted and just sat on my bed. He asked me for matches. Thinking about the relief that graduation was finally approaching, and I could leave all this behind me. So the last prank of the pep rally took place on a Friday, and when I came to school on Monday, a lot was going on. It probably had to do with Andy. I even hoped that the police were there, and questioning us all, he asked me for matches. Was just a group of students standing in front of the locker room. Then I saw some male teachers leading Andy out. Monday, this kid had been tied to the shower since Friday, and no one had noticed. Obviously, teen? They had taken him to the hospital, and I swear I was shaking in the hope that something big would happen. I saw my future burn to ashes before my eyes, but nothing happened. The rest of the day went normally, too normally. I haven't seen the boy since then. The guys and I tacitly agreed never to speak about it. It made sense. But we also distanced ourselves a little from Walter. It wasn't an agreement. It was just common sense. I believe that something went wrong before, and Walter knew that. After our last PE class, he laughed and patted us on the shoulders, matches, saying everything was fine and his father would ensure that the whole thing didn't go public. Richie asked what he meant by that, and apparently, me for matches, Walter's father had called the school to ask to solve the problem internally without involving the police. If they didn't, they vaguely threatened to prosecute the teachers, not us. At that time, I didn't like this mention of us. The rest of us hadn't really done anything. Know that we are all guilty. Nevertheless, I felt relieved, and I don't regret that. I got dressed quickly and stopped going to parties. Not even after graduation. I left this town to go to college and forget the idea of Andy and Walter. But I finished my studies and returned to start a business. It was then that I learned more about what had happened to poor Andy. He spent the entire week tied to the shower because his parents were away on business. But as I suspected, they didn't really care. Andy couldn't change schools, so he continued quietly after recovery. The following years without Walter seemed fine for him, but I wouldn't have been fine after that night. Allegedly, is it a therapist and is now taking medication for depression. I thought about, looking for the boy to apologize. Sure, wouldn't have been enough, but maybe it would help. However, I saw Richie again one day, and he told me that Andy had taken his life a year after graduation. Richie wasn't sure what had happened, but we all knew one thing. Walter had never left. He worked for his father even without a university degree, and Richie believes that Walter never stopped tormenting Andy, even if we weren't sure anymore. Now I know that none of the guys from back then still have contact with Walter. Does that mean we have grown up? Does that mean we all knew it was wrong? The fact is that I don't believe any one of them lives with the guilt. And I don't want to direct this only at myself. But there were times when I just couldn't sleep. For matches, could I have stopped this prank before it went too far? And how much of all this really rests directly on my shoulders?